Can you feel that sense of joy and pride? How wonderful for us to represent this age-old tradition here and to really have it resound in a way that our ancestors no doubt would have been pleased. It is glorious to be together here on Rosh Hashanah, again, fully together. I was talking to Todd over here, just looking back at our new windows and our new social hall and pickleball courts over there. Raise your hand if you had a chance to play pickleball on the courts this year. Yeah. It's open. We've been talking. I talked to David Sapphire. They're looking at 7 o'clock in the morning hours, so just be on the lookout. Yeah, sorry, Maureen. So, what a year it's been. My maternal grandmother, my grandmother Clara, our closest relative really, was a real spark plug. The older sister of many brothers, she knew how to mix it up with the best of them. One day when she was 10 years old, a girl in her 5th grade class was teasing her mercilessly about being Jewish, calling her, I imagine, all sorts of names, and we can imagine what they were. The problem for this girl is that my grandmother knew where she lived. And even more importantly, she knew that where this particular girl lived was just past where my grandma Clara lived, in the West End section of Boston, the same section as my grandmother always reminded me Leonard Nimoy grew up. So after school that day, my grandma Clara, as a 10-year-old, ran home as fast as she could to her family's 2nd floor apartment and prepared a bucket of ice cold water. She then went out to her balcony and waited. When the other girl went by, she poured that water right on her head, dousing the poor unsuspecting girl with water and letting the girl know exactly what she thought of her. Grandma Clara would often tell this story with a mischievous smile on her face. This is how you deal with the anti-Semites. That's what she was telling me. But despite this bravado she showed as a 10-year-old, Grandma Clara was indeed afraid of the Goyim. She was conditioned to be. They were the reason her parents had come to the country in the first place, fleeing pogroms in Russia to the safety of America. Everything in her kishkis told her to be on guard. America in the 1920s, you might remember, is the era of Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh. Was not exactly a hospitable place for Jews. So when she heard I started wearing a kippah out openly in 11th grade, she almost had a fit. She called my mom hysterically. She said, "Wear a hat over it." As a young man, I internalized this fear, watching my back as I walked down the street. For my friends and I, those of us who wore kippot, we made sure to follow our grandmother's instructions, covering our Jewish identities with baseball caps. America, as we've been told many times by family and community, was good to the Jews, but not so good you could be afforded to be wary. Anti-Semitism was always lurking, waiting, like my grandma Clara on her 2nd floor apartment, to pour cold water over our poor unsuspecting souls. Still, as time ticked away, as it moved from the 80s to the 90s to the aughts, I became more comfortable. Diversity became a good thing, and so was having a strong ethnic identity. Judaism was hip and cool and dope, so slowly I began to feel safer. This was America, the land of the free, home of the brave, the place that welcomed the tired and the poor, the huddled masses waiting to breathe free. America moved from being good to the Jews, but to just being good to the Jews, no caveat. And that is what I thought and continued to think until a fateful day 5 years ago, when events so large, so horrific struck our community, it shook the foundation of what it means to be Jewish, not only in America, but around the world. That event was, of course, none other than the Tree of Life massacre on late October 2018, the largest single attack on a Jewish institution in American history. On that day, a 50-year-old, quote-unquote, heavy-set white male walked into a synagogue in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh and opened fire. Bearing a Colt AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and 3 Glock 357 pistols, he murdered 11 innocent, beautiful souls, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, friends, community members, in cold blood, all just because they were Jewish. In the space of less than 20 minutes, our collective naivete was shattered for good. When we think about our American Jewish community, we can divide before Tree of Life and after it. Just to show you the impact it has had on us, let us go over a few facts. Prior to Tree of Life, the only time you might have seen a police officer, security officer, in an American Jewish congregation would be now, during the High Holy Days. After Tree of Life, there is barely a synagogue in North America without a police presence during a normal Friday night or Saturday morning service. I know when I visited Chautauqua this summer, I was shocked. I know Chautauqua has been through things, but it's a little tiny community, and there they had a police officer waiting on Saturday morning. Overnight, not just here, but in every single corner of America, Canada, and Mexico, from large cities to small college towns, college campuses, Jewish community centers, Federation synagogues, all have been transformed. Cameras have been added, buildings have been surveyed, congregants trained, and sophisticated security networks created, seemingly overnight. You can see the impact on our organizational budgets and in our decision-making. No other community in the world, and this is one thing as I started looking into it around our area that really shocked me. No other community, racial, ethnic, has ever attempted this type of change. You won't find a security guard in front of any other place in America except for synagogues. The call to action came through and we responded stupendously. This is a credit to a lot of hard work on the part of a lot of people, many of whom in our community are in our room today. It is also a credit to the generations who came before us, to people like my grandma Clara, with her bucket of cold water, willing to fight back against those who seek to harm. This is not only the new normal, but the old normal as well. As we jokingly tell ourselves in front of the holiday table, they tried to kill us, God saved us, let's go eat. In this telling, the outside world is dangerous, deadly, and always lurking. In this version of the story, we have to be vigilant. When the time comes, it will be up to us and only us to save ourselves. And yet, is this the only way that we tell our story? Is the unascribed they always out to kill us or hurt us? Is God the only one that saves us? Are we the only ones? Could the story of Tree of Life and of Jewish history in general be told differently? Could there be another way to tell our story where outside players also have a positive role, where the Jewish community is not alone in our suffering? Perhaps there is something we have been overlooking all along. So for answers, I started looking in the Torah readings for Rosh Hashanah, our traditional readings, the banishment of Hagar, the binding of Isaac, and I realized there's a reading that we have that is included within the normal Rosh Hashanah readings that we never talk about. It's a story not about family squabbles or inter-tribal conflict, but about neighborly cooperation. An alternative Jewish universe where small slights, misunderstandings, do not lead to violence and enmity, but to love and friendship. This is the story of an obscure Philistine king named Abimelech and his relationship to our patriarch, Abraham. Long ago in the Negev desert, a mighty nation lived. Having arrived from the Aegean Sea sometime before, they set up towns, built militias, and created society. The Philistines, as we know from the story of David and Goliath, were a force to be reckoned with in ancient Canaan. So when Abraham moved southward after separating from his cousin Lot, he had every reason to be afraid. He led a small contingent of strange and misunderstood faith called monotheism. In Genesis 20, the chapter before the 2 chapters we focus on during Rosh Hashanah, Abraham is so alarmed that his life is in danger, he takes evasive action, pawning Sarah, his wife, off on Abimelech as his sister. This is a very strange story, but maybe this is a way of creating alliance like they would do in a lot of monarchies. And while it's difficult to explain today, this is what he felt was his best option. When God comes to Abimelech in a dream and warns him of the danger of consummating his new marriage, the Philistine king has every right to be furious with our ancestral family. But instead of immediately taking action against these new upstarts, he confronts Abraham honestly. And he says, "What have I done to offend you? What did you see in me? What did you see in me that caused you to act in this way?" It turns out, and this is really surprising in the story, that Abimelech and the Philistines did not mean to harm our ancestors. He was not the bad guy that our ancestors made him out to be. Instead of leading to conflict and enmity, this first interaction between the 2 leaders, because of Abimelech's honesty, leads to an agreement between the 2 men, which they pledge their loyalty to one another in a truly beautiful manner. They say to one another, "This is the kindness which you shall show me at every place where we shall come. Say of me," it brings tears to me, "He is my brother, Ahu, not my enemy, but my friend." So when another confrontation between the 2 men arises several chapters later, during our Rosh Hashanah Torah reading, the foundation of respect has already been laid. In Genesis chapter 22, Abraham has heard a report that Abimelech's people have taken over one of his people's wells. Water, as we know, being precious in the Middle East, this is grounds for war. But war is not what happens. Instead of the 2 men coming together and fighting, they come together to create another covenant between them, a brit, pledging to continue to work together, not only in that moment, but with their children and their children's children and their children's children as well. The chapter ends with a beautiful sentiment. Abraham lived in the land of the Philistines for many days. I love this. It comes out of nowhere, and usually we just skip right by it. But that sense of peace, he lived in this place that was not his own in safety. The story runs contrary to everything we know about our relationship with our neighbors. Instead of "they tried to kill us, God saved us, let's eat." This is "they tried to help us, God saved us, and we ate together." Let's look back now at Tree of Life, using this story of these 2 Abes, Abraham and Abimelech, to serve as a guide to a new way of looking at the event. When the horrific event happened, the outside world was there for us. They responded to the call for distress and apprehended the suspect within 20 minutes of his entering the building, mitigating what could have been an even worse massacre. That weekend, the calls for sympathy came from all directions, from every segment of American society, all faiths and no faiths. They poured into our sanctuaries and gathering places. At Temple Besedek, the old building in Gettsville, there were over 500 people overflowing into the room, most of them not from our Jewish community. And on the months and years that have followed, the goodwill has continued all the way through the trial and eventual conviction of Robert Gregory Bowers this past June. Just think of all the many members of the outside community who have stepped in to assist us here in Buffalo. Police officers that stand at every service. Yes, there is a pay involved, but they are doing it out of a sense of duty and respect and honor of our community. Clergy members from every faith. Political leaders. The story of Tree of Life is not only about an increase of anti-Semitism, which is now at its highest level since my grandmother's childhood in the early 1920s, but is also about an increase of appreciation for Jews in America. We saw this firsthand when our members of our congregation visited Pittsburgh in early June. If you were among our group, just raise your hand. We had almost about 30 people there, not all from Shir Shalom community. We also invited guests from other communities as well. The Tree of Life building in Squirrel Hill, right down the street, as I heard from the University of Pittsburgh, which once hosted 2 conservative and 1 Reconstructionist communities, now sits empty. Around it is a gate to prevent people from entering. But around that same gate, artists of all ages and abilities have put up murals depicting doves, trees, opened and closed hands, and hearts. Murals with words like, "You're not alone," "Pittsburgh strong," and "peace." As Tree of Life, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers told a local Pittsburgh radio station, the synagogue community has drawn strength from these murals, serving as an uplift, not just to our neighbors, not just to Pittsburgh, but really to the world, that there is far more good in the world than evil. We saw examples of this love and goodwill extend not just beyond our Jewish community, but in our Jewish community itself. One of the most powerful things that they witnessed, and it brought tears to my eyes. We visited Rodef Shalom. Rodef Shalom is it's sort of the Temple Beth Zion of Pittsburgh. It's historic, a beautiful place. And as you can imagine, they usually stuck on their own. But when we were there, we learned about the cooperation between these 3 communities, that they housed all of the communities from Tree of Life there. And one of the most beautiful things that I saw, it just struck me, it's so beautiful. The person that was giving us the tour, she took us on the bima and showed us the ark. And inside that ark, and if you see most synagogues, they have kind of a uniform set of Torahs, a uniform set of mantles. They had Torahs with a mismatch. And that surprised me, being here at Rodef Shalom. It was one from each of the communities that they were hosting. And it was so beautiful to really see that cooperation. A Tree of Life member, so that's the member of the conservative congregation, Howard Feinberg, he put it best when describing the tenets of his former building. I didn't understand what this Reconstructionist thing was. They were those guys down the halls for years. Then he added, there's reason that they were in the same place, and it wasn't just happenstance. They're all Jewish, right? By embracing the other, it turns out we embrace the other in ourselves. To combat anti-Semitism this year, you might have noticed, how many of you have a blue pin when you came in? Okay, thank you for doing it. This is from the Robert Kraft Foundation. Yes, the Robert Kraft. It's called the Blue Square Stand Up to Hate Campaign. This blue square that I'm wearing, and if you didn't get one, you can get it on the way up, represents the size of the Jewish population in America, 2.4%, relative to the amount of hate crimes we experience, 55%. The campaign is an attempt to bring awareness to the outside world just how severe the threat is to our community relative to our size. So again, you can pick up these pins and wear them on your go, or bring them to others. This is not just meant for our Jewish community. If she were alive today, my grandmother, Grandma Clara, would no doubt be wearing one of these pins. And hopefully looking around, she would see that we were not alone in this world, but have millions of others standing by our side. In the 1920s and 30s, we were truly strangers in a strange land, a land that was not always so hospitable to people like us. Now, a century later, we too have reason to be on guard, but today we stand side by side with our neighbors, just like Abraham did with Abimelech in the Negev desert thousands of years ago. We too wish to live out our days in the land of the Philistines side by side with our friends from other communities. And as Isaiah tells us, knowing that while hatred of the other is still lurking, love, compassion, kindness are in abundance, an endless well ready to be refilled, to a good, sweet year ahead. A Shana Tova Umitu.